Welcome to a fantastic edition of Rebellion's educational series. I'm here with one of the smartest data minds I've come across, Evan Reich. Super impressive.
Right, Reich.
Reich, excuse me. Well, Evan is a contributor to a 2017 Nobel Prize, was head of data at hedge fund juggernaut Verition, was a top executive at Quandl, is generally considered one of the top minds in all of hedge fund data. So, Evan, thank you so much for coming on today.
You are far too kind, Alex.
No, I'm blunt, and you're extremely modest, and so I appreciate you being on. So why don't you tell our audience about your background? That looks pretty gnarly.
Yeah, since Alex is always fond of the Nobel Prize thing, and as I mentioned to him, the backdrop is actually sort of related to that. So that is obviously a black hole, stolen from the movie Interstellar. And the advisor, the technical advisor on that film was a guy named Kip Thorne. So he was the Caltech half of the Nobel Prize for LIGO, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory. And as a freshman at MIT, I had the fortune to work in a very, very small capacity, contributing. My job, for the record, was gluing little tiny mirrors onto an apparatus of sort of a mock-up of the thing and also machining some aluminum. So I still have all 10 fingers. So that's, it speaks to my aluminum machining ability. But other than that, really did not contribute in a substantial way because as a freshman in a physics lab with an experiment that started long before I got there and continued well after I had departed, my contribution was quite small. But I know that I heard Tony Berkman say somewhere that when he was at Carnegie Mellon, the stuff he worked on as a student is now in the Carnegie Mellon Museum. And when you go to the MIT Museum, they have a really large LIGO exhibit.
Really?
So there's nothing quite like going to a museum and seeing stuff you worked on when you
That,
were basically
that's
an
super
adult.
cool.
It just makes you feel very old.
No,
So,
no,
but
you
yes,
know, whoever knew gluing, uh, mirrors could be so important for your life. Wow.
indeed.
Yeah, no, that's it's a great story. But as a science mind, how do you feel about Interstellar? Are you a fan of the movie?
It is one of my all-time favorite movies. I actually have a Lego of Tars, the robot, on my nightstand. Absolutely love that film. Love everything about it. Huge Christopher Nolan fan in general, but Interstellar in particular. Adore that movie front to back. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's keep your humor setting at 100% because I think you're hilarious. So
Thanks, bud.
please don't hold back. No, it's actually one of my favorite movies as well. I keep it downloaded on my phone, and whenever I find myself delayed on a plane, I just jump into Interstellar, and 2 hours go by. So
Easily Timothy Chalamet's best work. I feel like that is the film for which he will be best known for in the course of his life, and he will not accomplish anything else. But clearly, that's he'll just have to settle for that, really. So yeah.
I love that 100% humor setting. So let's jump into hedge funds.
Yes, absolutely.
How has data changed in your view over the last decade?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest change of it has really just been the availability of it, in the sense that, when you think about and the younger you are, the less this seems like a thing. But, 10 years ago, the idea that, oh, you can just get, flow data that people used yesterday, people would be like, oh my God, how you couldn't even make that available. And now we see many sources of that. You look at, data from cell phones and oh my God, 10 years, how could you share? And now that data is more accessible. It used to be that you had to build the pipelines of everything yourself. Now we have, Snowflake and things like that. So the data is far more easy to access. Just in every single way, the amount of it has exploded, the accessibility of it has exploded, the granularity of it has exploded, which means that the problem we used to have was how do you take the limited amount of good information you could get and use it efficiently? Now the problem is there's so much information. It's like, how do you filter the signal from the noise? Because there's so very much of it and it's so easy to get your hands on. So that's a real change in how to attack it. That it used to be, it was like, how do you even get in there at all? And now it's like, I have so much. How do I decide what I should be using? How do I parse through it? How do I find what's distinct? Many years ago, people would talk about the data they were using, and it was a secret of like, you can't tell anyone the data sets that you talk to. And now, you go to the big data events, Rebellion Research, and you see the people there, and the idea that like, oh my God, these two people would know each other. It's not a secret. It's very widely spoken of for the overwhelming majority of things. And I think that's a really big change in just the amount of visibility to the whole process front to back. And that is easily the biggest change.
Yeah, I mean, as a French engineering teacher, I've seen, a million groups fail on a data set that another group had fantastic alpha on. So,
Yeah.
one data set can be very valuable and not to another. A former colleague of yours, Bill Daig, told me a decade ago that hedge fund data was just going to absolutely explode. And if I wanted to make a lot of money, I should start a hedge fund data company. Do you see that explosive growth continuing?
I think the amount of data that's there has definitely exploded. I think the challenge is that the really unique sources of it, where there's so much value in them, continue to be hard to find as people tap more into them. The alpha gets tapped out of a variety of things. So, what's really interesting and really speaks to what's happening, staying ahead of that continues to be really hard. The amount of data that's really been valuable consistently throughout. Has really moved. A number of years ago, everyone was like, "Oh, satellite pictures," and we never even talk about that stuff anymore. There was a period of time where people were talking about, "Oh, cell phone location," and we talk less about that. And now, of course, it's all
So let
about
me
like,
pause. So you're not
yeah,
bullish on geolocation data?
it's not so much not bullish. I think that like one time there were seemingly hundreds of vendors of it, and now
Right.
you see
Yes.
a lot fewer. Now you see a ton of people now. It's like, oh, things around prompts and things around crypto, and because that is the exciting flavor, and some of those will make it, some of those will continue to be relevant, but the amount where the trends are going and the winds are following in terms of people chasing alpha really continues to evolve, continues to be interesting. What is old becomes new again. You really see those interesting developments, and I think have taking a long view. That's the interesting part about the marketplace. That now I think we're going back to what is real expertise and what are the people that can lend real insight to things. Because when there is so much information available, it's less about like give me the cool information and more about how do I work with this cool information? What am I supposed to think? There's so very much of it. How do I know if this is representative? How do I find an angle on this? And for that, you need people who really know what they're talking about. So
So the way fracking makes great value out of older wells, do you see
yeah,
kind of older data becoming more useful in time with stronger models?
I think it can be if it's still around. I think like there's always been stories of, I can think of a couple of funds where, their origin tale is like their founder, found a book from the 1920s and read it and was like, these strategies still apply. We just haven't seen them because they're, subsumed to a bunch of other things in the marketplace.
Yep.
And I think you can see the same with data potentially, where, if it's still around and you can still access it and, the deep history of things, not a lot of the new information we have has years of history. And so if there are trends that are coming back around that maybe we haven't seen since, the 1980s, there may not be statistical models to follow it. And so there will be some interesting things that can happen. Whether they do, we'll have to see, and whether we have the tools to take advantage of that. But certainly as more and more people use the same set of tools to attack, a lot of problems, the gaps in LLMs will necessarily create opportunities in those gaps if there's people that can understand where the information lies and what reality looks like that maybe those models are missing. So that can be quite interesting.
How often have you seen data sets just lose their predictive powers?
um all the time. I think it's probably less, it really becomes a question of what you're predicting. So I think that there's data sets where they move from being alpha to being beta, where people still continue to use them, but they're not tapping it for kind of the most interesting new signals. That happens constantly. I think where data sets just cease to be relevant at all. Things come along that'll replace them. I mean, if you look back, a number of years, there was, the big credit card data set that everybody was using.
Mhm. Yeah.
Hardly used at all now. Now that panel has changed. A lot of things about it have changed. But you do see things like that check in. I mean, talking about, Quandl back in the day, there was some data that they had that spoke very well to certain automotive trends that, ceased to be information because some of those sources dried up or changed their nature or what have you. So I think that's always been the case. I think it's how do you stay ahead of that and what's really important and how do you tap into those trends, both as somebody who creates data, somebody who finds data, and somebody who utilizes it.
And how do you know as a head of data sourcing, if data is good? Do you test the data yourself? Do you do back tests with some of your, firm's models? I mean, how do you know if there's real value to a data set?
Yeah. I think as the head of data, in most cases, or certainly where I've been, I haven't necessarily known that because it's not, there aren't enough hours in my day. There have not been enough hours to say this is where the value is. I think what you have is in sitting in that role is you understand everything that's out there. And so by virtue of understanding all the information that's out there and how people are using it, when something new comes along that is different or has the ability to lend something new and interesting, you can say, this has the potential of this.
Right.
And then once you tap into the potential, it becomes, is this applicable? I know, in the moments before the call, we were talking about some things. Different strategies will speak to, if somebody has, a strategy where they're trading second to second, tick to tick, and you have like, long secular month-long trends, very unlikely to inform that trading pattern. It's not impossible, but it's not likely to be the case. And so everything has to fit in the right scenario for the right set of folks. And I think anytime you're working with data, you really want to take a view of what is the competitive space in which I operate
Right.
and why should there be an advantage here, given that it is a zero sum game in the grandest sense. What am I bringing? What is my unique view on
So
this?
your
And to
knowledge
try
of
to
your
tap into that.
portfolio managers, models really is what's very important. Understanding what they're looking for.
It's incredibly important to think about, the framework in which you're going to be using it and whether these things can inform each other or not. And then you can save a lot of time and, burning cycles on things that are unlikely to have utility. So, yeah.
So AI and ML, how have they changed data infrastructure inside hedge funds?
Yeah, I mean, they're changing it right now. I think when you look at the engineering pipelines and things like that, that historically took a lot of people and a lot of time and a lot of energy, you're seeing those becoming dramatically compressed. And so you're going to keep seeing that. Most people are not, winning through data engineering. And so as a result, like, look, if you could just push a button and have an engine load everything and handle it and process it and do all that work. And there have been firms over the years that have tried to capture that, Crux and others. And they were too early, they were too whatever. But right now, there's really no good reason why the overwhelming majority of those processes will not ultimately end up in an agent running a variety of things and not having people focused on that time. And that is it's an incredible change. As far as actually finding signals and things like that, I think, it's still going to be the human intuition that does it. But in terms of shortening the pipelines of what it takes to get to, if you could explore one thing, now you can explore 100 things. Now you can explore 1,000 things, tapping into that, but also being cognizant of the cost of doing the exploration. Tokens cost money. And so people are going to have to start, being more deliberate in how they use that in some cases as those costs can actually add up dramatically.
Yeah.
So.
So where do you think the next big edge in financial data will come from?
I mean, my hope is that it comes from where it's always come from, which is that it comes from people with intuition and knowledge and being clever and thinking about new ways to think about things, coupled with new sources of information that are coming to market all the time that people can tap into and do interesting work with. I think, again, as you collapse these processes around technology and other things, you're going to see some new opportunities arise for people to do things in different ways. So historically, where one person couldn't build a data pipeline and use it and trade and whatever, the right person with the right set of tools and time on their hands can actually do all of that. So could they, create a strategy that is unique and special that, the owners of giant hedge funds might look at and go, nah, we're not going to take a flyer on you. You may see individuals able to tap into opportunities that were previously unavailable to them and really create, micro hedge funds, for lack of a better way to put it. I think that'll be interesting. Whether we find out about them ever is a different story. Whether people just trade their strategy, keep it to themselves, and do well. But I think the opportunity for that exists in a way it never did.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to see you at the Fordham Quant conference next week. That'll be a lot of fun.
Likewise, super excited.
And as we get to the end of our show, I gotta jump back to Interstellar. How do you feel about the ending?
Um, Look, every movie requires some, central thing you have to buy into and be like, yeah, this is ridiculous, mostly. And so, look, is we can't say that that's true or not true. We don't know. Emotion through history, whatever. It certainly sounds good. I mean, it sort of ties into the idea of, humanity being something important rather than an accident of evolution that we're here. And, the puddle model of, wow, this fits me really well. What a great space that was created just for me. So in that sense, look, we're the ones telling the story. It's meaningful from our perspective. Would I like to see a sequel? Probably, if it was good. But overall, it worked for me. As a parent, as these things, like, it touches my heart in the right way. Certainly, if I were younger and watched it, I'd be like, this is hokier. But you get older and you feel things in a different way. So I think it's one of those experiences that is enjoyable in different regards. And I look forward to watching it again in 20 or 30 years and seeing if I have a different take on it as an old person, or an
Awesome.
older person, I should say.
Last question.
Yeah,
For the students out there who want to be a data scientist at a top hedge fund,
yeah.
what skills would you recommend that they hone?
I think the biggest thing is really just a desire to be creative and explore things. I think as we look more at the tools that are available, the need to code and do these things is going to be less and less over time. The need to be able to access large data and do that structurally is going to be less and less over time. The ability to understand the information and really have that curiosity, particularly on a data science angle, to say like, hey, here's something coming from the world and I'm making it up. It's a gas pipeline. And it's like, oh, I'm going to go attack it with numbers. Look, the models are goofy. You can ask it to take a Bayesian, calculation of a jar of pencils, and it'll be like, great. But that doesn't mean that that represents something in reality. And so the ability to pursue interests, your interests, somebody's interests, and understand, how gas pipelines work and understand that and really get into it and then apply that knowledge is going to become more valuable because the things that are really easy to access at a low level of like the machine learning model just kicks back this function, anyone can do that. Having actual knowledge and experience and being able to do it in an intelligent way, that's going to be what is ideally rewarded by a deeper understanding that the models are not going to be able to capture. And those are the areas people can really pursue some stuff and hopefully, find some value and some interest and do some good.
Wonderful. Evan, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for the time today.
Likewise, it's a great pleasure.
Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
You as well.